Today I'm speaking with Diania Merriam. I was interested in speaking with her from a personal finance perspective. Everyone's familiar with the FIRE movement where people try to save up 25 times their expenses and retire early. She took a different approach and instead reached her Coast FIRE number and then left traditional W-2 corporate work, but still works and didn't go down that traditional path. She also runs the EconoMe conference, a personal finance conference with educational sessions, workshops to build a sense of community between people in the financial independence movement. So, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. So, I wanted to get a little bit into your story. So, I know that your story started off paying off $30,000 in debt. So, what was the background behind that? How'd you accrue that debt? And what was your approach to money in those early days?
Well, I certainly had my 20s. I think accruing that debt was really just about not paying attention and being financially illiterate. So, yeah, I spent most of my 20s really not knowing anything about personal finance or money aside from that I should probably make more of it. Like that was my mentality is I just wanted to make six figures by the time I was 30. That's what I was focused on. And I was not paying attention to expenses. I wasn't budgeting. I mean, I was paying my bills on time, but I would say I was probably living paycheck to paycheck. And about 28 years old, I ran a credit report on myself. And that's when I realized I was 30 grand in debt. So I didn't even realize how much debt I had because, again, I wasn't paying attention. I knew I had some. I was paying on credit cards, I was paying some student loans, but cumulatively, I had never added it up. So that was a big wake up moment for me to run a credit report on myself and be like, oh, I didn't realize it was this bad.
Yeah, that's always a huge thing. I went through a pretty similar experience myself in my 20s, and getting out of debt was tough. And then when you run the credit report and you see the total figures, it's kind of a shocking realization.
Oh, yeah.
So, looking at your mentality when you were younger, do you think that that's pretty standard for the typical American and the typical American family? So, what do you think? Where do you think that mentality comes from? Where does it lead to? Do you think it's widespread?
Well, I think, we don't learn about money in school. So being financially illiterate is kind of the norm, I think. I even just thinking about growing up, like my mom taught me about balancing a checkbook. She did tell me like pay off your credit cards every month, but obviously I didn't listen. She never taught me about investing. I had no idea about compound interest and how it was working against me with all that credit card debt. I took out student loans when I had a full academic scholarship. I took out loans for living expenses. It was so stupid, but they were offered to me and I didn't have anyone telling me that that was the wrong thing to do, And so I think that it's kind of the norm to just not be aware of this stuff, but we're also conditioned to be consumers from a very young age. And we don't realize that we're on a hedonic treadmill. I think it took me a long time to realize that the less materialistic I am, the more idealistic I get to be. But also, like, modest living in the US is really luxurious compared to a lot of the rest of the world. At one point, the World Bank reported that like half the world population was living on less than $5 a day. But we're not comparing ourselves to those people. We're like comparing ourselves to the Kardashians. So I think a lot of us like don't even realize like how fortunate we actually are. And that's just a cultural norm. Yeah. And I think that mentality of like, I just need to make more money. I think most people think that more income is going to solve any financial worries. But if you can't manage $1,000, you can't manage $1,000,000, right? Like more income doesn't solve the issue of financial illiteracy. And I mean, for some people, they truly have an income problem. I didn't have an income problem. I had a money management problem. And so coming to terms with that it was a relief, like I thought money was too hard to figure out. And then when I discovered all this FIRE stuff, I was like, oh, this is an incredible opportunity. And I don't have an income problem. I just have to fix how I manage my money. Like this is a very solvable thing.
Yeah, and that's a good point you make about comparing incomes to global incomes. I read once that you only need like $15,000 a year to be in the global top 10%. So when people are talking about income disparity and things like in the US, if you're living a pretty standard middle class US lifestyle, that is a luxurious lifestyle in comparison to what most humans experience.
Totally. And especially like if you're listening to a podcast like this, you most likely have running water, you have access to the internet, you probably have a cell phone, you're probably easily able to clothe and feed yourself every day. If that's you, you are freaking winning, right? Like let's just start there. I think a lot of
Yeah.
us, we perceive ourselves to be a lot more disadvantaged than we actually are. And not to say that this is like, we'll talk about fire stuff. This is not a solution to systemic poverty. Like, there are people in the world that are truly disadvantaged and don't have any options. If you're listening to this, it's probably not you.
Yeah, and when you get into the fire stuff, I think a lot of times people talk about it like it's this extreme deprivation to live like maybe a slightly lower than middle class lifestyle for a little bit to save up some money. But you're talking about you have a car, you're getting all your groceries, you're living in a nice home. Like it's not, I don't think of it as like a really extreme deprivation to just downgrade your lifestyle a little bit in the United States to save some extra money. But that's how it's kind of perceived by the outside world.
Oh, 1,000%. Like when I started cleaning up my money, one of the things I did, at the time I was living in New York City and I would like go out to lunch and dinner like every day. I just started cooking every meal that I ate. And I would bring my lunch to work, which a lot of people act like, oh, like cooking for yourself as a single person in the city is just unrealistic and it's such a pain in the ass. And then like, I want to go out to lunch with my colleagues or whatever. But I would bring in these like extravagant kale salads, and people would be looking at what I'm eating like, wow, that looks amazing. And I was spending a fraction of what I was going out to eat, and I was eating better and healthier. And so it's just laughable to me that like to bring your lunch every day is seen as an extreme hardship when it's just simply not.
Yeah, that is definitely a crazy example. And that's becoming an increasing phenomenon where more and more meals are eaten outside of the home. Like I know when I was a kid growing up in like the 80s and 90s, it was like you went to a restaurant once a month and it was like a big deal. And now it seems like that's the standard is to just go out for all of your meals all the time, which is a really crazy luxury if you really think about it.
Totally.
Yeah. So, okay. So once you were in debt, you saw the numbers. Was it the number itself that sparked the desire to get out of debt, or were there like other factors that came into play where you really were like, I need to pay this off?
It was part of it was just looking at the number because I recognized that I had some real limitations on what I could do with my life with this like debt hanging over me. And so one of the things I aspired to do at the time is I wanted to walk the Camino for my 30th birthday. And for those who aren't familiar, the Camino is a 500-mile trek across northern Spain. I did end up doing it. It took me 38 days to walk 500 miles, and I took 2 months off of work unpaid. And so, like, knowing that I wanted to go do this thing, at the time, I didn't know a sabbatical was going to be an option for me. Like, I assumed I was going to have to quit my job. And I had in my mind, like, oh, I'm going to like travel the world and maybe I'll meet my husband on the Camino. And like, I just wanted to like, to be unencumbered, to just like go out into the world and like see what would happen. It was just a very like, I think when you turn 30, it's like a very reflective time. Like, what the hell am I doing with my life? And so when I was 28 is when I was starting to think about that. So I think the Camino really pushed me because I knew that I wanted to keep my options open. And in order to do that, I was going to need to have money. And the first step was going to be digging out of debt.
Yeah, I think when you are able to take some time off and do something you want for a long period of time, that puts things into perspective. I think GL Collins did something similar. He went to Europe for a month or two, and it's not something that most people can just do once they start working.
No. And well, and it's funny because I'd either meet like, people in their 60s that had traditionally retired, or I'd meet, young people that like just graduated high school and were like taking a gap year to figure out their lives, you know? So I didn't meet a ton of people my age that were able to kind of take this like mid-career break.
Yeah, that's an awesome thing to do. So once the fire was lit and you're like, I'm going to get out of debt. So what were the strategies that you used to get out of debt? What were some of the things that you looked at to learn about getting out of debt?
Well, the first thing I did is I used this debt reduction calculator. So that was really just like a very practical way of looking at all of my debt together, looking at all the interest rates, looking at the minimum payments, like coming up with this calculator I found, like if you just Google debt reduction calculator, it's like one of the first ones that pops up. It's just a free thing, like a free spreadsheet online. But it had this drop down menu where you can compare like snowball versus avalanche strategies. And so I was able to see really clearly like what's going to lead to me paying more interest and what's going to help me get out of debt quicker. And then there was this like feature in the calculator where if you had extra money at the end of the month that you were going to like throw more money at it, like where should you, put that extra money? So that was just more strategically and like practically like what tool I used to get out of debt. But I think the bigger piece of it is I needed a big mindset shift. I was spending like $2,000 to $3,000 a month partying. That's why I say like I
Wow.
had my 20s. I mean, I was going out a lot, and that was hard for me to wrap my head around. Like at the time, I was having a lot of fun. I was single, I had no man and no kids. I just wanted to like live freely. And this idea of like depriving myself for a financial goal was not appealing at all. And that's why a lot of the stuff that I came across first, like the Dave Ramsey stuff and like eat rice and beans until you're out of debt, like that just didn't appeal to me. Like, yeah, I wanted to do the Camino, but did I want it bad enough to like be miserable for a couple years? I don't know about that. Right. So I kind of felt like I needed to find a different way of thinking about it. And that's when I came across the fire stuff, which the Mr. Money Mustache blog to me was like, I like to call it a refreshing punch in the face because it like completely changed my perception of reducing my spending. Not that it was deprivation, but it was like this huge opportunity to be resourceful and creative. And I just loved the tone of optimism that like this is not a struggle, kind of like what we talked about before. Like it's not a hardship to bring your lunch to work with you, like can we switch our mindset around that to be like extremely grateful for the abundance that we have, And so that was transformative for me. Aside from this debt reduction calculator, like I just started really scrutinizing every single dollar and really becoming probably overly frugal, but it took me 11 months to get out of debt. So to me, it was like a season in life where I was really experimenting with like, how far is too far? Like, when does it start to feel like deprivation, even with this mindset shift? So, like, for example, there was this one time that I needed Tupperware or whatever. And I go on Craigslist to buy used Tupperware. And I get on a subway and I go all the way up to Queens to spend $6 on like 5 pieces of Tupperware or
Yeah,
whatever it was, right?
that's too
Like
far.
it
That's
was too far. It was too much, And then I was like, I was making my own face wash and I was making my own laundry detergent. And it was all in the spirit of experimentation. Like, I would read, like, I was reading the Frugal Woods a lot during that time. So I was like kind of enamored with this idea of resourcefulness and DIYing everything. But I tried it and realized, like, I just want to buy regular laundry detergent. And that's not going to move the needle that much anyway. Right. And so I think I kind of evolved after my initial experimentation with frugality and, what level of spending really aligns with my values and is comfortable. I kind of netted out where if I can do really well on the big stuff, then I don't really have to worry about the little stuff. So I didn't move to Cincinnati I ended up moving to Cincinnati in 2017, which is the same year that I walked the Camino and, took those 2 months off of work. I didn't move to Cincinnati for the cost savings, but it was a huge cost savings. Like I kept my New York salary. I convinced my employer to let me work remotely. And then at the time I was paying like $1,800 a month for a cockroach filled apartment in the bowels of Brooklyn to then paying like $900, which was like kind of high at the time for like a really nice apartment in the best part of town, and then I ended up buying my house in 2018 and now my mortgage is $600. Like if you can do really well on those big things, then just like the little stuff doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think if you really focus on the big things like housing and cars in particular, I think that does like 80% of the heavy lifting in your personal finance.
Totally. And like finding resourceful ways to like replace the ways you used to spend money. So like for example, me going out all the time, I'm like going out drinking with my friends. Well, my solution to that was to make my apartment more fun than a bar. And so I would host these dinner parties and I would come up with games. I would do like clothing exchanges to like, benefit from all my fashionable friends who had closets full of clothes that they never wore. I just like got all their hand-me-downs. It was awesome. Like there were certain things that I did that not only was I saving money, but it was like, it was just, I was having more fun. And so that's why it took a lot of experimentation during this time, but the idea of that reducing your expenses always leads to feelings of deprivation. I just think that that's a false dichotomy. You know what I mean? Like, I think that if you approach it with the spirit of creativity and recognizing that this is like an internally motivated pursuit. I'm experimenting with frugality on my own terms versus it being forced on me because I'm living paycheck to paycheck and then I lose my job or something, right? And then I'm forced to spend less in a way that's really uncomfortable versus like I reduced my expenses a ton, but it was on my own terms. And that felt a lot more freeing. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And yeah, and if you the move to Cincinnati, I think, is a good example of how it's not really that much of deprivation to go from, a little closet in New York to a house in Cincinnati and dramatically reduce your living expenses. I'd rather live in a house in Cincinnati. That sounds like a more luxurious lifestyle.
It really is. I mean, now I feel totally spoiled because this is like the nicest place I've ever lived in my life. And I'm paying $600 a month. Like, that's crazy to me.
That's awesome. So you discovered the FIRE movement and Mr. Money Mustache. So what were the big ways that influenced you?
So I discovered it in the fall of 2015, when I was kind of trying to get out of debt. And it it made me realize that I had this incredible opportunity in front of me. And I was wasting my privilege, frankly. I'm an educated white woman in a first world country. Like the fact that I was living paycheck to paycheck just because I didn't feel like paying attention, I don't know, it feels like I'm maturing, to be able to move past that and like
Yeah.
put my big girl pants on, I guess you could say. And that it's not all doom and gloom like, our society would have us believe. I felt like it was a form of personal development that was disguised as financial responsibility. Because in me spending less money, I was spending a lot more time reading books from the library and journaling and exercising and being creative and finding other ways to occupy myself that wasn't so like consumerist centric. Right. So there's a big part of it to me that like it feels like it led to me just a lot of like personal development in ways that I didn't expect.
Awesome. And so as you moved along in this journey, and by the way, I agree with you that it seems like it's more of a personal, it's like the money is what draws you into it, the idea of retiring early, but I do think that there's more to the journey than just, the money at the end. That's what reels you in, but that's not really what it's all about.
Absolutely.
So as you moved along in this journey, how did your attitudes about financial independence change?
Mm. Well, I think I now realize, when I first got into it, I was so hyper focused on this idea of like reaching this number, right? Like 25 times your annual expenses. And I probably had to recalculate it like 10 times because my life just looked so different year to year that it just was like this kind of ever moving target that ended up like not being helpful over a period of time. I think I've come to realize that financial security and the ability to take risks is way more important than reaching my fire number. I think I'm more like a slow fire person now, and like this idea of creating a life that you don't need to retire from. And, I do these case studies in Cincinnati with like our Choose Fi local group, and we get all these multimillionaires in the room who like they have all this financial resource, but they can't see the opportunity in that at all because they're so hyper focused on reaching their fire number. You know what I mean? And I I feel like there's something backwards about that. I also don't think like work is the enemy, right? Like I think work is actually really necessary for good mental health. Like I think we want to be productive and use our time in ways that are meaningful. I think what we really want is not to not work, but to right size the role that work plays in our lives. So I like to tell this, like, I have this little analogy that I came up with to kind of try to explain this. Like, I think most of us would agree that 3 meals a day is a reasonable amount of food. That's kind of like a normal amount of food that you'd want to eat, 3 meals a day, right? But what if society said, actually, you need to eat 6 meals a day and you need to have an overlord standing over you, making sure you eat all of that, right? I feel like the fire solution to that is like, fine, I'm not going to eat at all then. And I'm just like, or you could just go back to 3 meals a day, right? So I almost feel like fire and early retirement is almost this like extreme solution to this issue of how our culture has ruined work for us. And we've turned work in or having a job, work and having a job is, I think, two very different things. Like I work, I mean, I produce this conference, the EconoMe conference. I don't make any money off of it. There's financial benefit to it, just simply because the tax code favors business owners. So there's some efficiency there in having a hobby business, but it's not like I make a real income from it. But it's still a lot of work. And it's a great way for me to use my time. But yeah, I think I've definitely changed my attitude around like what is the end goal. And it's not to reach your FI number. It is to create a life that you don't need to retire from.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, if the goal is to retire to like sit on the couch and watch Netflix, you're probably going to be very mentally unhealthy. It's going to be just as bad as a miserable job.
Right. I mean, it's like if you find that you have so many interests outside of work and like the time commitment of a 9 to 5 is impeding on your ability to do other things that you really enjoy, that's different. That's almost like you're being pulled towards something else versus a lot of people, they're running from something. They're running from a job that they don't like versus being pulled towards something that they would prefer. And I just think if you don't like your job, the answer is not to retire early. It's to go find a job that you like, you know, because it's also, I think you need to take time to diagnose what is even driving that desire to retire early. Because a lot of people think that their job is making them miserable, but it could be that they are just miserable and their circumstances aren't really affecting that.
Yeah.
Right. So like you could put yourself on a beach with your fire number and be sitting on this pile of money. If you were miserable before that, you're probably going to be miserable after that. So it's like it takes time to diagnose what the actual issue is.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then when you have to actually confront that, that's probably a pretty hard thing to do.
Oh yeah, that's why we joke that like the reward for FI is an existential crisis. I feel like everyone goes through it when they quit their job and they think it's going to be one way, and then they have a very rude awakening. Because I will tell you, as someone that is now, I quit my job in January of 2021. So what, it's been like 3.5 years, something like that. It is very possible to have too much time on your hands, and you feel every moment, especially when you don't have good mental health. When you have good mental health, you are choosing to do meaningful, rewarding things with your time. When you're struggling mentally, having that much time on your hands, it becomes a disaster. Ask me how I know.
I see. Yeah, I could see how that could lead to some issues. So when you were saving this money, when you were pursuing the 25x traditional fire, like what kind of percentage of your income were you saving, and how were you achieving that?
Yeah. So on average, I was saving 60% of my income. And I would say that I would largely achieve that from those low fixed expenses, right? Like getting myself to a place where I had like such a low mortgage. And I mean, even when I was in New York City and I was like cooking all my meals, I would pride myself on like feeding myself on $50 a week. This is back in 2015, 2016. So obviously it's, different now, but just really being very mindful about keeping my expenses low. At the time, I was very diligent about like tracking every dollar I spent and budgeting and just like being hyper aware. I'm not that way at all. I don't look at my spending at all anymore. So I think it's also like important to think about, this isn't, you asked this question, you're going to ask this question later about like for young people. But I would say to anyone that like feels like this sounds daunting to like budget and track every dollar and learn about investing and all that stuff, it's a season. Like I did this for such a brief period of time that, once you get yourself set up, it becomes easier over the long run. Like you don't have to hyper focus on this stuff forever. And honestly, I think the game of winning at money, part of it is not thinking about money anymore, but you have to do that for a relatively short period of time, especially in the beginning when you're, learning about the stuff and digging out of debt and all that kind of thing. But yeah, I would say it was due to having those low fixed expenses. And also during this time, I got 20% raises like 3 years in a row. So my income jumped a lot right at the time that I was figuring this stuff out. And so my income was going way up and my expenses were going way down. And so I was just really growing that gap between my income and expenses.
Yeah, most people do the opposite. It's like, oh, I got a raise. I'm going to get a really cool car and a bigger
Yep.
apartment. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. And so eventually you shifted and you went into the coast fire style. So why'd you do that? And like, what is coast fire and how do you think that can be used to your advantage?
So I like to think about Coast Fire as front loading your traditional retirement savings. So if you think about fire as this continuum where maybe like your first milestone is debt freedom, and then you save up your emergency fund, and then you save up your FU money, let's say, or peace out money for the polite among us. Those are kind of these milestones that you're reaching on your path to FI. I look at Coast Fi as another one of those milestones, after the FU money, where there are calculators online that can help you determine this. But it's a point where if you didn't save one more dollar, if you didn't invest one more dollar, your nest egg is going to grow to what you need at a more traditional retirement age through the power of compound interest. It's almost like you're letting compound interest do the rest of the work for you. And it enables you to take your foot off the gas a little bit, because it's almost like your saving and investing is done. You front loaded it, it's done. Now all you have to do is cover your expenses until you start drawing down on that portfolio at, say, let's say 65.
Okay. And you talked about like FU money. So there's a lot of different definitions of what FU money is. Like a lot of people think it's the 25 times. Then there are people who say it's like $1,000 or something. So what's your definition of that?
I define it as like, if my emergency fund, I define it that for me is a year of expenses. I know a lot of people do like 3 to 6 months and they feel like, oh, I don't want to hold too much cash because it's not optimal and it could be making more money in the market. For me, a year of expenses is my emergency fund. And then FU money would be 2 years. So it's just like a hyper, it's a hyper emergency fund. It's just having more of a pool of money that will get you out of a situation that you don't want to be in when it comes to work. It's almost
Gotcha.
like your emergency fund for work, right? And this is what happened to me. You get a bad boss, things change drastically at your place of employment, and you got to get out of there. We don't think of being miserable at work as an emergency, but life is too short for that, man. You know?
Yeah. So you're thinking more in terms of like you're out of debt, you have low fixed costs, and then your portfolio and your emergency fund and everything is at least like two times what you would need to live on in a year.
Yeah, and I would, for me, I defined it as outside of my retirement vehicles. So like
Oh,
in my
okay.
after tax brokerage, I had a year, and then in cash I had a year. And that's when I considered myself having FU money, cuz I would find it very hard for me to like touch my retirement accounts in that situation, but in after tax brokerage I would be more comfortable with.
Yeah, understood. And I think that's something a lot of people the way you describe the work situation, that's something not a lot of people understand until they're there. I've been there. And I know that the feeling of I can't quit this job, I need this job, is one of the worst feelings in the world. And I don't think it even matters how much money you're making. Like, I think there are probably investment bankers out there making incredible sums of money who are in a position due to their fixed costs where they're like, I can't quit this job. And that feeling of being stuck, I think that's just one of the worst places you can be in life.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, money creates options. And it gives you breathing room to even be able to see those options, right? Like one of the things that boggles my mind is there's so many people in the fire movement that have enough money already to make a change. And they think if they reach their FI number, like even you're saying, I'm going to be there in 4 to 5 years. And I'm listening to you going, what do you want to change? Do it now. Like you don't need to wait until you're to make a big shift. You already have too much money to not be happy with what you do with your time every day. And I think a lot of people are in that position, but it's almost like I think in the fire movement we pride ourselves on like we don't adhere to the dogma of work a 9 to 5 till you're 65 and we're all counterculture and like we're doing our own thing. But at the same time, we're trying to follow the rules of what the fire movement says, right? So is that really us taking charge of our own lives? And again, don't make any decisions because I tell you to quit your job tomorrow, but that's just kind of my thing. Like I feel like I push people to quit when they reach Coast Fi and to re-examine the way work plays a role in your life. Because if you can just work a little bit and like cover your expenses. So right now I'm covering my expenses on 4 hours of work with a podcast that I host. It's 4 hours a week and I make $1,200 a month on that. And that's what I contribute to my family's expenses. And so, you know what I mean? Like that allows me to have a lot of freedom and experience the benefits of FI without actually being FI. So I guess the thing that I try to instill in people is I think a flaw in the question that we're asking ourselves. I don't know that, do I have enough money to never make an income again at a young, like I'm 37, right? Like, I don't know that that is a very helpful question. I think a more helpful question is, do I have enough money to take a risk? And that answer is probably yes for a lot of people listening to this.
Yeah, that's probably true. I know that with my own situation, like I'm just extremely like risk averse, and I definitely before I make that switch, I want to have an overwhelming amount of money. But
No,
yeah, you're
I
probably
hear
right. I
you.
don't need to do that.
Well, my response to that is at a certain point in financial stability, like when you are financially stable and secure, which if you're 4 or 5 years away, you definitely are, your risk flips from running out of money to running out of time. Like I look at, yeah, here's the thing. One of the, sorry, I'm like getting all on my soapbox about this, but I think that the pursuit of fire is a really like pessimistic pursuit, right? We're worried about having enough money. We're worried about what could go wrong. Even in like financial planning, you're plugging in a ton of assumptions because and you look at those assumptions like they're probable, but the reality is that you don't know. I don't think you could ever know with 100% certainty that you have enough money now that you will need for the rest of your life. You could have a black swan event that completely wipes you out. Like you just don't know, right? But I also don't think that your bank account or your net worth can provide the amount, like, can do the emotional labor that you're asking it to do, right? Like your sense of security is not in your fire number. Your sense of security is in your skill set, in your connections, in your relationships, in your what you've accomplished in your career. So like people tell me all the time that I'm an idiot for quitting my career and I'm going to run out of money and I don't, I'm too young to retire early, whatever. I made my clients $50 million during my career. The idea that I can't figure out making more money if I'm wrong about this is ludicrous, right? And I would say that's the reality for a lot of people pursuing fire because these are ambitious, intelligent people that are highly skilled. And so I get being risk adverse, but I just think if you take a hard look at your money, it's like, is the risk of being miserable at where you are, I think is a bigger risk. And this is where 1 more year syndrome comes in because people reach their FI number, but they're so risk adverse that they're like, well, just 1 more year. And I think you have this perception that if you reach your FI number, you're going to start giving yourself permission to live differently. And it doesn't really work like that. Like that's an inside job that isn't affected by your financial circumstances as much as you think that it is.
Yeah, and it's actually something I've been thinking about a lot lately because my expenses just plummeted. I paid off my mortgage, so that definitely went a long way towards dramatically reducing my fixed costs. So yeah, I might be able to do it a little bit earlier than that. Okay, so besides Coast Fire, what are some of the other like flavors of financial independence that you think are worth going after?
Well, I just think it's interesting that there's even flavors of FI to discuss, right? Because the thing that I've realized in like being so immersed in this community, I've gone to like 12 Camp FI events. I produce the EconoMe conference. We get 500 people, that come every year to the EconoMe conference. I do these local meetups. I've talked to a lot of people about FI. And what I realize is that everyone's doing it really differently. And the only thing we agree on is to spend less than you earn. Everything else is up for debate. There's no one right way to invest, there's no one right way to spend. There are examples out there of people doing it. And I think people have the perception, that you can't spend a lot of money on a car, or you can't spend your money this way, or that's not the FI way of doing it. But there's no one right way to live your life, right? And spending money is just a reflection of how you're living. And so the only thing that we agree on is to spend less than you earn. But I would say that these flavors of FI are our like attempt at just forming an identity around it that may or may not be helpful. And to create kind of like cliques within the movement. I don't know if it's necessarily helpful. You got the fat fire people judging the lean fire people, and you guys are doing it wrong and you're depriving yourself and blah, blah, blah. Right. But if I had to put a name to like what I subscribe to, we already talked about Coast Fire. I think that was the milestone that made me feel safe enough to quit my job when I found myself in a situation that was untenable. But slow fi to me, this idea of like not racing towards the finish line, the pioneers have a lot of content around this idea of creating a life you don't need to retire from. And, I'm not fi. I will get there eventually because I'm still saving and investing, even though I don't need to. But it's just there's extra money laying around. So that's what we do, But also, a financial goal is only as helpful as like the change that you're going to make when you meet it. Right. So you save enough money to buy a house and then you buy a house. You save enough money to retire and then you retire. Like, I don't really have anything that I would change about my life if I reached FI tomorrow or if I had $10 million tomorrow. So I guess that's what the goal has become irrelevant. And I think it's because I have more of a slow fi, coast fi, or even barista fi mentality where I don't think work is the enemy. I think autonomy over my work is the goal.
Makes a ton of sense. Yeah, I agree with that approach. And I agree with you that work is not the enemy, especially if you can find work that you genuinely enjoy. And I think work is generally good for you. It's good for your mental health to be engaged in something, to have some kind of purpose, to be useful to society. I definitely think that's a good thing.
Absolutely.
So as you approach financial independence, what do you think are some of the key things, some of the good things that happen to you before you reach that final destination?
Like we talked about before, how it's almost a personal development endeavor disguised as financial responsibility. I think at a certain point, and I see this happen, even with the people that come together at the EconoMe conference, like when I'm putting together the content, I really try to have a good mix of like lifestyle design, mindset, asking bigger questions kind of stuff. And then there's the tactical drawdown strategy. What do you do about health insurance? Like the practical side of things. But I would say that what's most impactful for people is that asking bigger questions. Again, it's when I reach my FI number, or how fast am I going to get there, or like obsessing over my spreadsheet isn't as helpful to me at this point as asking, what do I want to do with my time? Who do I want to spend it with? And what do I want to create? So I really think of like money as a tool, not a goal. It's like this hammer. And in the FIRE movement, when we get too fixated on the tactical, practical stuff about money, it's almost like we're glorifying this hammer. And we're talking about, where am I going to store the hammer? And like, how am I going to bejewel the hammer? And, all this stuff about this tool. Whereas what am I going to do when I like pick up the hammer and swing it and build something with it? Like, that's a more valuable question to be asking about the hammer. So I think that through that process, it can really put you in touch with what you value, which I think is a lot harder to determine than what you see in personal finance content. Like you hear like Ramit Sethi and like everyone says, oh, just spend money on what you value, which sounds really good on a podcast, right? And it's a really good soundbite and it sounds good in an Instagram post. But how do you know what you actually value? How do you know that that is like an intrinsic motivation, or if you are just following along with your cultural conditioning, right? It's like, how do I know that I want what I want because I want it versus because I've been conditioned to want it? That's a big kind of unraveling that needs to happen to really like get in touch with what you truly value so that you can spend your resources accordingly, and not just your money, but also your time and energy.
Yeah, that's a hard question. Like, what do you value? And like, that like the rich life stuff. I'm not like totally on board with it. Like on one level, I think you can really get out of hand with that. You can really get out of hand with saying like, well, this is my rich life and I deserve this. I can see that quickly escalating out of control. And you're right. It doesn't get to the heart of like, what do you actually value, which is the very difficult philosophical question.
Exactly. Yeah. But when you have more time and space in your life with which financial security can provide, you don't need financial independence for that. I think when you're not drowning in consumerism, you simply have more time for other interests, right? When you're not spending all of your time shopping and bejeweling yourself and, adhering to what society tells you your house needs to look like and maintaining all of your possessions, when you're not spending all of your time doing that, you just have a lot more time and space to pursue other interests and get in touch with these bigger questions.
Yeah, that's a good point. Is like you never really get a chance. A lot of people, most people never really get a chance to slow down and even think about those things because they're so kind of caught up in the rat race.
Yep.
Interesting. So, thinking about like pursuing financial independence and a sense of community. So, I think pursuing financial independence can be a very lonely thing if you don't know people who are in kind of the same mindset. So, how important is a community to pursuing financial independence?
Well, I created a whole conference because I think it's extremely important. I think that relationships are like the most important part of life and your enjoyment of life. And for me personally, like tapping into the fire community was game changing. And I think the reason why I created this conference is because there is a very large, robust community online. And that did not resonate with me. I think there's a lot of keyboard warriors, even within the fire movement, right? There's a lot of people that will be very judgy through a screen. And there's just, I mean, you see it. There's just shitty people online. Like, let's just face it, right? But
Yeah.
the kind of person that is willing to get on a plane and like very intentionally put themselves in a room with other people who are in this similar pursuit, I'm telling you, these are the most creative, intelligent, and generous people I've ever met. And so the first exposure I had to this in person community, and I cannot stress enough how much it needs to be in person to avoid the shitty people online. But the first one that I went to was in 2019. I went to Camp Mustache in Seattle, and I participated in a case study. Four of us put together, a presentation of our income, our expenses, our investment strategy, our assumptions and questions that we had about our plan. And it felt like I was like getting naked in front of all of these strangers. But what's amazing to me about that experience is that it felt like everybody in the room knew way more about money than I did. But because they were so generous and like just good, nice people, they just provided like so much reassurance. And it wasn't like anyone like sat there and like schooled me, and like, that's such a stupid thing you're doing with your money right now. Like that's what they'll do online, right? But in
Yeah,
person, it's like
exactly.
the vibe is just like when someone is in front of you in person pouring their heart out about all they're worried about their money, and you're a financial expert. It's like, I remember this question I asked about, I was like so stressed out about tax loss harvesting because I just felt like I didn't get it and I'm not doing it right. And am I losing out? I'm not optimizing my plan because I haven't figured out tax loss harvesting. And this guy was just like, he did the quick calculation of like how much it would benefit me to do tax loss harvesting. And he's like, you're talking about like a point zero something improvement, let it go. It's not, you're doing awesome. So like the reassurance about my fire plan that I got from meeting people in person, that alone is a reason that community is so important. And just that these people are so thoughtful, they're so eloquent. They're like, I just like that, like, I am the dumbest person in the room when I'm around fire people. And I love that because I can learn so much from them. Like, I'll give another example, even on my business, it's entrepreneurship is hard, and it's just a lot of like trying stuff, and you don't know where it's going to go. It's a lot of throwing stuff at the wall and trying to figure it out. Right. And so even this month, I'm going to fly to Denver to spend a few days with one of my fire friends who's also an entrepreneur, and she's going to sit down with me and like dissect the business and look at all of my systems and look at all the long-term planning that I've done and poke holes in it and like look at it with me. I'm not paying her anything to do that, right? She doesn't need my money. But it just, to me, FI is better with friends. That's the tagline of my event. What is the point of retiring early if you have no one to hang out with? And it gives you the opportunity to find people to travel with. Like the amount of fire friends that I have that are like all going to Bali together next month is so fun to see. I have another couple friends who met at the EconoMe conference and formed a romantic relationship, and they've been together for like 2-3 years. Amazing. It's just so incredible to me to see, like, it's not just about having someone check your numbers. Like, these are people you want to be friends with, that you want to hang out with, that you want to travel with and start businesses with. And they're the only people you probably know that have full autonomy over their time to be able to do that.
That's awesome. So for people who want to attend the event, what are some of the key ways that they can, like, where should they go? What should they check out? What are some of the things they should consider before they attend?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, economyconference.com, and economy is spelled with an M-E, not an M-Y at the end, because I think I'm so clever. But we actually, I don't know when this recording is going to come out, but as of today, we have 34 tickets left. So if you want to come, it might be sold out by the time you listen to this and look at the website. But yeah, you can see like all of our programming, the schedule. I haven't announced any speakers yet, but I will by the end of the year. All of our videos, like all the main stage speeches, are on YouTube. So a great way to just like even get a taste of what it's like is just to check out the YouTube channel, and you can watch all the main stage videos there. But yeah, the main point of the event, we have amazing presenters and workshops and breakout sessions and main stage speeches and a lot of like fun social activities. But the main goal in coming is to engage in the community. Like, if you only care to see a speech, just like wait for it to come out for free on YouTube. Like, that's not a good use of your money, right? If you're going to pay to come to EconoMe, buy a ticket, buy a flight, buy the hotel, like that is an investment in finding your FI best friend. And that is really the goal of the event. Awesome.
So yeah, this will probably come out probably in a couple months. So right, today's September 4th. So I usually record, I have a backlog that I keep, in the pipeline. So that's probably when this will come out, like more. But like,
then, you can get on the mailing list. I have a newsletter to stay in the know about the event and like come to a future one, and be notified when tickets are available for the future. I'm planning to do this for many years to come. So, even if 2025 doesn't work out, there will be more conferences in the future.
Awesome. Well, sounds like a great event. And, you've discussed where to go for the event. What are some of the other ways to learn about your content and reach you?
Yeah. So I would say getting on my mailing list is probably number one. I don't have a big social media presence. Like, I do have it, but it's not very well maintained, as you could see if you like look me up on Instagram or any, social media. My brand is all about in-person connection, so I kind of like it that way. So the best way, if you actually want to hear from me, is just get on my mailing list. I send like 2 newsletters a year. I barely send any, but that's a good way to stay in the know. And I'm also the host of the Optimal Finance Daily podcast. That's a daily show where I'm reading to you from personal finance bloggers and offering a little bit of commentary at the end. So it's about 10 minutes or less every single day. And I like to say that these bloggers like wrote these awesome songs and I get to perform the covers.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time today.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. For more information, please go to securityanalysis.org. Subscribers to the website get early ad-free access to podcast episodes in addition to weekly in-depth profiles of companies.